Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having invited me and to give me this opportunity to present my ideas in this very interesting setting. My name is Ferrer-i-Carbonell, and I have been working on life satisfaction, happiness, and well-being for about 22 years now. Many of us in the field of happiness have over the years thought about public policies as instruments to enhance well-being. There are actually many public policies that could be implemented. Many of those policies, however, are long-term projects, which means that one reaps the benefits much later. There are policies, however, that are pressing and its implementation can lead to fairly immediate positive results. I think that the proposal I defend today here falls into this last category, and COVID-19 has accelerated its need. I would like to support a policy proposal that I think will make a substantial difference in terms of well-being for an important part of the population. Namely, I think that the government should contribute to establish the mechanisms that would allow underrepresented workers to coordinate and have negotiating power, notably via collective bargaining. Underrepresented workers include a fairly broad range of workers, and its categorization is difficult and can slightly depend on the country. I will go more into detail later, but have in mind that when I say underrepresented, I refer to workers as different as gig workers, casual workers, or self-employed. Not only in Canada, almost everywhere in the Western world, there is a substantial and increasing amount of workers that are underrepresented in the policy arena. And I would like to advocate not necessarily for the design of specific policies directed to these workers, but rather for a policy that wants to empower them so as to balance the power of the different actors in the economy. Through coordination, these workers can advocate themselves for designing labor, tax, and social policies that seek to maximize their welfare, and not only the welfare of those that are represented. Some of these workers may, others may not, face legal constraints to unionize, but they all share in common a coordination problem that hampers their capacity to negotiate with policymakers. I understand that Canada has taken some important initiatives, for example, the Freelance Union, and I also know that the Minister of Labour is meeting with employers and unions, as well as with groups representing those working through digital platforms. But going further would set Canada as an example, and this would have an important impact. In these processes, one needs to think about including and distinguishing very different types of underrepresented workers. For example, one might think of gig workers. Those are, of course, the largest chunk of workers we have in mind when we think about underrepresented workers. Those already existed and include traditional causal employment, such as temporary workers or those working through temporary work agencies. But it also includes those that work through digital platforms, such as Amazon riders or Uber drivers that have increased in quantity in the recent years. Some of those gig workers include more creative jobs, such as working for Google. Another set, very different type of workers that are underrepresented are the self-employed workers, or also employers of very small business, owners of very small business. Have in mind 1 to 4 people business, small restaurants, etc., for which working for themselves is typically linked to a larger satisfaction with their life and their work. Outside of the scope of this policy that I'm recommending, one could even think about another portion of the population, which are the unemployed and the young people, which are often also underrepresented. But this is a much more complex problem that I will not touch upon today. As I said at the beginning, this is about giving voice in a structured manner by helping establishing the mechanisms through which workers in non-traditional type of contracts can coordinate and negotiate. It's thus about balancing power. Policymakers face many trade-offs. In this context, for example, they need to protect labor while not destroying jobs. Gig workers face poor working conditions, and through these negotiating mechanisms, this type of workers can obtain labor protection, health and safety regulations, minimum wage, sick leaves, etc. But policymakers also have to protect consumers. Consumer choice is important, and choice is good for consumers' well-being. The gig economy, for example, might have lower prices or offer more variety of products or longer opening times. Choice, however, is also being able to shop in the small bookstore, and this is only maintained if small businesses do not get eaten up by unfair competition. And that's why I argue that a well-being enhancing policy is about balancing power. So that if the gig economy expands and puts out of the market a small business, this is the outcome of a negotiation in which all agents are well represented. Policymakers, of course, also face fierce competition to attract large business, other than those operating through digital platforms who typically employ gig workers. They also, policymakers, have to attract companies investing in R&D that offer good jobs and help maintaining production in key sectors to avoid, for example, the supply shortage of vaccines. Policymakers, as I say, face a lot of trade-offs. And that's why it's important that the policies to design mechanisms to help different types of workers to be well represented, rather than to decide what is good for them. The aim of this policy is to increase workers' well-being, which is not only a goal in itself, but it also has positive effects to the general population. Happy workers are more productive and contribute to a more stable society and to sustain growth. Sustained and stable growth, even if smaller, is preferred in terms of well-being to strong business cycles, as recessions with high unemployment and poverty rates are very damaging for well-being. Although these issues have all been very relevant over the last decade, COVID-19, as I said at the beginning, has accelerated the process in a tremendous and unprecedented way. Gig workers have increased their share over the last year, and the numbers have only increased after the outbreak of the pandemic. Self-employed and small business, which also represent a large percentage of the Canadian economy, are struggling with COVID restrictions. Why do I think that this policy would have an impact on happiness and well-being? It is true that gig workers, and in general temporary and casual workers, allow flexibility and offer jobs to people that have difficult access to a regular labor market, such as young people, long-term unemployed, low-educated, students, etc. Nevertheless, there are also many aspects of the jobs of the gig workers that might make them very vulnerable in terms of satisfaction and happiness. And it's those aspects that can be negotiated into collective bargaining. The literature has shown that individuals' happiness and life satisfaction depends to a large extent to having a good job. But a good job means many things that gig workers may not have access to. It's not only a high income per se, but it's also certainty and stable income. The current working conditions, health, safety at work, autonomy, access to unemployment benefits, etc., have also shown to impact positively happiness. And gig workers are lacking some of them, as well as they lack training at work and they have no promotion possibility. I talk about certainty of income, but certainty is not only important in monetary terms, but also in working types. Flexible working can be desired in some circumstances, but stable working times allow to balance work life and work family and work social life much better. Social capital and close relationships are key to individuals' happiness, and individuals in stable working times can more easily foster social relationships. Social capital is not only relevant for individuals' happiness. Countries with high levels of social capital, trust, and shared norms are also more cohesive and function better. Some individuals may choose to work in the gig economy, but there are many as well who do that because they have little access to stable jobs. And my proposal here is that they are able to coordinate and negotiate so all those aspects I mentioned that may be well-being damaging can be negotiated in a table with a policymaker. In contrast, however, self-employment or individuals working in very small firms enjoy autonomy and typically have jobs that are closer to their interest and education. And here, therefore, I distinguish what I would call true self-employment from gig casual employment. Self-employed are, to me, those individuals that have small jobs, that they work for themselves because they want to work in things closely related to their studies, closely related to their interests, and they like job autonomy, which is a key determinant for job satisfaction and well-being. The expansion of the gig economy might force a small business to close or self-employment to go to unemployed. This would reduce well-being of society. Of course, there are also very creative and autonomous jobs in large companies. This is just a small picture of what I'm trying to do here. Being unemployed is actually one of the worst things that can happen to an individual in terms of economic terms, of course. There are personal things that can be worse than unemployed. And young and unemployed individuals are also overrepresented. Among many policy proposals, to me, when I was thinking about this seems to be one of the most effective in order to increase the life satisfaction and well-being of a growing part of the population. There are other policies that are aligned with the ones I propose here, but would require longer-term investment. Investments in education, regulating the life-work balance, get incentives to create a startup of small business. Those are policies totally aligned with what I'm saying, but require longer time investments and are more costly. Instead, fostering and establishing the mechanisms to allow an increasing significant part of the workforce to coordinate and increase their negotiation power is less costly than many other social policies, while the outcomes of such negotiations are bound to have an important effect on well-being and happiness. Although of a much smaller size, the impact that this would have can be thought in terms of all rights gained by the labor movements at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, such as the 9 hours working day. Thank you very much for your attention.